Welcome to the deep dive. We're really thrilled to have you with us today because we are unpacking something that quietly governs literally every single second of your waking life.
Every second.
Yeah, the underlying architecture of decision making. Now, if you are listening to this, you are probably the type of person who likes to think of yourself as fundamentally rational, right?
Oh, absolutely. Everyone does.
Right. You weigh your options, you look at the data, you consider yourself a logical actor in an illogical world. But here is a number that should make you pause.
Hmm.
You make roughly 35,000 decisions every single day.
It's just a staggering cognitive load.
Just let the sheer volume of that wash over you. 35,000 microcomputations, what to eat for breakfast, whether to fire off a quick reply to that mildly irritating email right this second.
Or let it sit in your inbox until tomorrow.
Exactly.
Oh.
Whether to take the highway and risk the traffic, or take the side streets and risk the stoplights.
Right, and to be perfectly clear, for the vast majority of those 35,000 decisions, operating on pure intuition, or what we might call vibes, is a perfectly acceptable strategy.
Yeah, vibes are fine for lunch.
Exactly. If you're deciding whether to have a turkey sandwich or a salad for lunch, or if you're scrolling through Netflix on a random Tuesday night trying to pick a sitcom, your gut feeling is the best tool for the job.
The stakes are basically non-existent.
Non-existent. Overanalyzing what kind of mustard to put on your sandwich is just a massive waste of mental energy. You just go with what feels right.
Right, but the danger, and really the core mission of our deep love today, is what happens when we take that exact same vibes-based decision-making process and apply it to the massive high-stakes forks in the road of our lives.
That's where it falls apart.
When it comes to the big stuff, whether to accept a new job offer in a different city, whether to negotiate for equity instead of a higher base salary, whether to hold on to a plummeting stock, or even, whether to commit to a long-term relationship, operating on vibes is a slow-motion disaster.
It really is.
We think we're being thoughtful, but we're actually just letting ancient, flawed biological wiring take the wheel.
Which is exactly why we're diving into a truly phenomenal piece of writing today. It's a comprehensive thread, an article by an author who goes by the handle Dark Zaji.
Or at Zaji, I think.
Yeah, at Zaji. And the piece is titled The Hidden Math Behind Every Decision You Make and Why Most People Get It Wrong.
That's such a good title.
It is. And what makes this source material so compelling isn't just the rigorous mathematics it presents, but, well, it's the raw, highly relatable humanity behind it. The author doesn't position themselves as some infallible guru on a mountaintop.
No, not at all.
They start the entire piece by confessing to a monumental, incredibly expensive mistake they made by relying purely on intuition.
That opening anecdote is just so visceral. The author talks about spending 3 agonizing months trying to decide whether or not to pack up their entire life and move to Paris. And I want you, the listener, to really picture how this decision was made because it is uncomfortably familiar. How did they evaluate this massive life pivot?
Let me guess. No spreadsheets.
0 spreadsheets. They didn't build a financial model. They didn't calculate the long-term career impacts. They lay awake at 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, making mental pro and con lists.
Oh, the 2 a.m. mental pro and con lists. We've all been there.
We've all been there. They were trying to essentially feel their way to the right answer. They went entirely on the romantic vibes of living in Paris, finally pulled the trigger, moved across the world,
And hated it.
realized they absolutely hated it within a week.
It is the ultimate cautionary tale about the illusion of intuition. Because when faced with a complex, multi-variable problem, our brains simply cannot process all the data points simultaneously. So our subconscious just takes a shortcut.
It swaps the question.
Exactly. It substitutes the impossibly complex question like, what is the mathematical probability that moving to Paris will yield a net positive outcome for my career and happiness over a 5-year horizon?
Which is a very hard question to answer.
Way too hard. So it substitutes that with a much simpler question. Does the idea of Paris feel nice right now?
And of course it does. It's Paris.
Right. And because the idea feels nice, we make the leap. We mistake emotional resonance for analytical rigor.
And I think anyone listening to this has a Paris story of their own. Maybe it wasn't a geographical move. Maybe it was a car you bought because it looked amazing on the lot, even though it was completely impractical and out of your budget.
Or a toxic job.
Oh, yeah. Maybe it was a charismatic founder you went to work for, ignoring all the red flags because the energy was so good, only to find out the company was a complete mess.
We've all taken that leap based on a feeling and immediately felt that cold dread of regret in the pit of our stomachs.
But here is the promise of today's deep dive. The author argues that there is a fundamentally better way to operate, a mathematically sound operating system for your life.
We are going to explore 6 powerful, perspective-shifting mental models. Now, I know the phrase mathematically sound operating system might sound like we're about to hand out a calculus exam.
Yeah, please don't log off, listener.
Stick with us. This is not about memorizing dense equations. It's about fundamentally rewiring how you perceive risk, reward, and reality itself. Fair warning, though, as we unpack these models, you are going to experience some cognitive dissonance.
Oh, big time.
The material is designed to hold up a mirror and ruthlessly expose the flaws in how you've made major choices in the past. It will likely make you cringe at your own history.
It made me cringe at mine.
But if you can sit with that discomfort, these frameworks will arm you with an analytical edge that very few people possess.
I am ready for the discomfort. Let's get into it. So where do we start? If we're throwing out the vibes-based system, what is the foundational building block we replace it with?
The absolute bedrock of this entire system is a concept called expected value, or EV. If you want to stop making decisions based on emotion, EV is the master formula you have to internalize.
Okay.
EV. In the worlds of probability, professional investing, behavioral economics, expected value is the gravitational force that dictates everything. And the concept is elegantly simple in theory. Any decision you make has a spectrum of possible outcomes.
Right.
Each of those specific outcomes has a probability of actually happening and a payoff or a penalty if it does happen. Expected value is just the mathematical sum of all those possible futures. You find it by multiplying the probability of an outcome by its payoff and then adding all those different scenarios together.
Okay, conceptually I follow that, but when you just hear probability multiplied by payoff, it can feel a bit abstract.
Sure.
So let's ground this. The author uses a brilliant thought experiment to demonstrate how deeply our brains rebel against this math. Imagine you and I are sitting at a table. I pull a standard fare coin out of my pocket.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
I look you in the eye and offer you a very specific bet on a single coin flip. If the coin lands on heads, I will hand you $150 in cash. But if the coin lands on tails, you have to hand me $100.
150 to win, 100 to lose.
Right. Now, I want you, the listener, to genuinely gauge your immediate internal reaction to that offer. Because when behavioral economists run this exact scenario in studies, a massive percentage of highly intelligent people instinctively hesitate. And many outright refuse the bet.
They refuse it because the immediate, visceral thought that flashes through their mind is, I could lose $100 today. The potential for loss just entirely dominates their mental bandwidth.
It overrides the upside.
Completely.
Yeah.
But let's strip away the emotion and look at the actual expected value of this offer. We break it down into its component parts. A coin flip is a perfectly symmetrical 50-50 proposition.
Right.
So outcome number 1 is winning $150. The probability is 50%. If we multiply 0.50 by 150, we get a positive value of $75.
Okay, that's half of the upside.
Yes. Exactly. Outcome number 2 is losing $100. The probability is also 50%. We multiply 0.50 by negative 100, which gives us a negative value of $50. To find the expected value of the decision to take the bet, we simply add those two values together. Positive 75 plus negative 50 equals positive $25.
Which means, mathematically speaking, every single time you agree to take this bet, you are essentially earning $25.
Yes.
Not literally on that specific flip, of course. I mean, you either win 150 or lose 100, but the value of the decision itself is positive $25.
Right, because if I offered you this exact same bet 100 times in a row, you would be absolutely out of your mind to walk away.
Oh, completely. Over 100 flips, the variance smooths out, the probabilities assert themselves, and you would walk away with roughly $2,500 in pure profit. It is statistically free money.
Exactly. And yet, humans routinely reject it. So the profound question isn't just what is the math, but rather, why does human biology actively fight the math?
Yeah, why are we wired to be so bad at this?
The answer lies in a deeply ingrained cognitive bias known as loss aversion. This isn't just a quirk, by the way. It's an evolutionary survival mechanism.
Like from the caveman days.
Yeah, hundreds of thousands of years ago, when our ancestors were wandering the savannah, the calculus of risk was fundamentally different. If you missed out on an opportunity to find an extra berry bush, a missed game, you might be a little hungry that night.
Not ideal, but you survive.
Right. But if you fail to notice the rustling in the grass, a potential loss, you were eaten by a lion and removed from the gene pool entirely.
So our brains literally evolved to treat threats and losses as vastly more urgent and significant than equivalent gains. We're the descendants of the paranoid hominids who always assumed the rustling grass was a lion.
Precisely. Fast forward to the modern world, where we're dealing with stock portfolios and career moves instead of lions, and that ancient wiring becomes a massive liability.
It's totally outdated software.
In modern psychological terms, studies consistently show that losing $100 hurts you emotionally about twice as much as winning $150 feels good.
Wow.
Twice as much.
The psychological sting of the negative outcome is so potent that it completely short-circuits your prefrontal cortex. The math is screaming at you that the EV is positive 25, but your amygdala is flashing red lights and sounding alarms about the $100 you might lose.
It's a biological glitch.
And it sabotages us constantly. We systematically overweigh the pain of a potential downside while criminally underappreciating the mathematical reality of the upside.
But let me push back a little bit here, just acting as the skeptical listener.
Please do.
The coin flip is a neat laboratory trick, but life isn't a series of sterile $100 bets. How does this actually translate to the messy reality of trying to build a career or manage real money? It translates directly, and the stakes are exponentially higher. The author provides a phenomenal high-stakes example regarding career trajectory that illustrates exactly how loss aversion keeps people trapped in mediocrity.
Walk us through it.
Imagine you're at a crossroads in your career. You have two distinct options on the table. Option A is the safe, established route. You stay at your current corporate job, keep your head down, and you are guaranteed a salary of $120,000 for the year. There is zero ambiguity.
Okay, option A is the safe bet.
Option B is the volatile route. You join a messy, chaotic, early-stage startup. After doing deep due diligence, you realistically estimate there is a 60% chance this startup succeeds and gets its next round of funding.
And if it does?
If it does, between your salary and equity payout, you'll make $250,000.
Nice.
However, there's a 40% chance the startup crashes and burns within the year, leaving you with only $70,000 in base pay before you have to go out and find a new job.
Now, if you ask 10 people on the street which option they would take, 9 of them are going to instantly choose option A.
Instantly.
Because the vibes of option A are incredibly comforting. It's safe. You know exactly what your mortgage payments will be. Option B feels terrifying because that 40% chance of failure looms incredibly large in our minds.
It's a rustling grass again.
Exactly. The thought of having to explain to your family that your company went under and you only made $70K, it triggers that exact same ancient survival panic as the lion. But if we force ourselves to override the panic and run the expected value calculation, the picture changes completely.
Let's do the math. Option A is simple. It's a 100% probability of $120,000. The EV is exactly $120,000.
Easy enough.
Now, let's look at option B. We have a 60% chance of the massive upside, $250,000. If we multiply 0.60 by 250,000, we get a positive value of $150,000.
And just as a quick aside for the listeners who might actually go read the original text.
Oh, right, the typo.
Yeah, you might notice a tiny typographical error where the author accidentally typed 350,000 in the written formula breakdown. But the final result they calculate, 150,000, is mathematically correct based on the 60% of 250,000 premise. So the underlying logic is perfectly sound.
Good catch. So moving on, now we factor in the downside risk for option B, a 40% chance of making only $70,000.
Right.
0.40 multiplied by 70,000 gives us $28,000. We add the value of the upside scenario to the value of the downside scenario. 150,000 plus 28,000 equals a total expected value of $178,000.
The contrast is mind-blowing when you lay it out like that. Option B, the terrifying startup rule, is mathematically worth $58,000 more than option A.
It's not a marginal difference. It's a massive premium.
But because of loss aversion, because that 40% chance of short-term pain feels so overwhelmingly bad, people routinely cling to option A. They voluntarily surrender nearly 60 grand of expected value just to purchase the feeling of emotional safety.
They pay a massive premium to avoid anxiety.
They do. However, we have to introduce a massive, crucial caveat here, which the author explicitly warns about.
Yes.
Understanding EV does not mean you should become a reckless, unfeeling robot who blindly chases every single positive expected value opportunity, regardless of context.
Right, because if I take that startup job and I hit the 40% failure scenario, my landlord doesn't care about my expected value. They just want the rent.
Exactly. If that $70,000 means you literally cannot feed your kids or keep a roof over your head, then the math doesn't matter.
That concept is called variance. Variance measures how wildly the actual results can swing away from the theoretical average in the short term. In the real world, variance can kill you before the expected value ever has a chance to materialize.
It's the ultimate reality check.
If losing the coin flip or failing at the startup results in total financial ruin, what statisticians call an absorbing state, where you can no longer play the game, then you absolutely must not take the bet. You cannot survive the short-term variance to reap the long-term mathematical reward.
Right.
The goal of this framework isn't to force you to take ruinous risks. The goal is simply awareness. You need to at least know the expected value before you let your gut make the final call.
The real tragedy is that most people don't even bother to do the math.
They don't.
They let their fear make the decision automatically. They take the safe route every single time without analyzing the cost. And then 10 years later, they look around and wonder why their career has stagnated while others have leaped ahead.
That distinction between knowing the EV and surviving the variance is profound, and it transitions us perfectly into the second major mental model from our source material, which deals with how we evaluate those underlying probabilities in the first place.
Right, because if your probabilities are wrong, your EV is going to be wrong.
Exactly. The author calls it base rate neglect. If EV is the master formula, base rate neglect is the sneaky intuition trap that feeds bad data into that formula. It perfectly explains why we, as humans, are wrong way more often than we think we are.
It is incredibly insidious.
The core concept here is that when we're faced with a specific, highly detailed situation or a very compelling emotional narrative, our brains almost entirely ignore the foundational background probabilities, the base rate of that event occurring in the broader universe.
We get tunnel vision.
We get total tunnel vision on the specific details right in front of us, and we completely forget to ask how common this phenomenon is in general.
I want to illustrate just how easily our intuition gets utterly hijacked by this. The author presents a classic mind-bending scenario from the medical field. I'm going to set this up, and I want everyone listening to try and answer it instinctively before we break it down.
All right, let's do it.
Imagine there's a newly discovered, very rare disease. In the general population, this disease affects exactly 1 in 1,000 people. You go to your doctor for a routine checkup, and they decide to give you a test for this rare disease.
Right.
The doctor looks you in the eye and assures you that this specific test is incredibly reliable. It is 99% accurate. A few days later, your phone rings. It's the doctor. The test results came back positive. Based on that information, what is the actual probability that you are sick with this rare disease?
Now, if you are like almost every human being on the planet, your immediate visceral gut reaction is screaming 99%.
Naturally.
The logic feels totally airtight. The test is 99% accurate, the result is positive, therefore I am 99% likely to be doomed. It feels like a simple, undeniable kind of sense. But as the author points out, if you said 99%, your intuition has failed you spectacularly. You are completely and utterly wrong.
And listener, do not feel bad about getting this wrong, because massive peer-reviewed studies show that a terrifyingly high percentage of actual practicing medical doctors get this exact question wrong when presented with it in a clinical setting.
Which is deeply comforting.
Yeah, very comforting.
But the math here is incredibly counterintuitive until you map it out visually and slowly. So let's physically picture the data. Let's imagine a representative sample of 1,000 people standing in a room.
Okay, I've got 1,000 people in my head.
Now, based on the foundational base rate, the background probability, before any testing happens, we know that only one person out of that entire group of 1,000 actually has the rare disease.
Right. The other 999 people in that room are perfectly, completely healthy.
Correct. Now, let's say we administer this 99% accurate test to all 1,000 people in the room. What happens? First, let's look at the one person who is actually sick.
The test is highly accurate, so it will almost certainly correctly identify them. That gives the doctor one true positive test result.
Yes. But now we have to deal with the 999 healthy people. The test is 99% accurate, which inherently means it has a 1% error rate.
Ah.
It will produce a false positive 1% of the time. So what is 1% of those 999 healthy people? It is roughly 10 people. The test is going to wrongly tell 10 perfectly healthy people that they have the disease.
So when the dust settles, the doctor is holding a stack of positive test results. Out of our group of 1,000, there's one true positive from the actually sick person, and there are 10 false positives from the healthy people.
Right.
That means there are 11 positive test results in total, but crucially, out of those 11 people holding a positive test, only one of them is actually sick.
Exactly, which means if you're the person who received that phone call from the doctor and you are holding one of those positive tests in your hand, your actual mathematical chance of having the disease is 1 out of 11.
1 out of 11. That is roughly 9%. Think about the sheer magnitude of that cognitive error. Your gut, and likely your doctor's gut, screamed that you had a 99% chance of being sick. But the cold, hard mathematical reality is that you only have a 9% chance.
It's wild.
The base rate, the foundational fact that the disease only occurs in 1,000 people to begin with, is the dominant force in the equation. It completely overwhelms the seemingly impressive 99% accuracy of the test. And yet, the human brain ignores the base rate almost every single time because we are blinded by the shiny, specific, immediate information, the positive test result, sitting right in front of us.
And this isn't just a quirky statistical puzzle to make doctors look foolish. This fundamental misunderstanding ruins real-world decisions and destroys capital constantly.
Oh, absolutely.
The author pivots from medicine to a painfully relatable illusion from the business world. Think about the tech startup ecosystem. Every single week, thousands of incredibly smart, driven people launch a new app or software company, and they all tell themselves the exact same story.
My idea is revolutionary. My team is brilliant. Look at how huge Uber or Airbnb became. We are the next Uber.
Exactly. They are entirely focused on the specific, shiny details of their own compelling narrative.
But the author brings a brutal, icy reality check to that enthusiasm. What is the actual base rate of a startup? Just merely surviving and becoming a marginally profitable, sustainable business has a base rate of around 6%.
6%.
The base rate of a startup becoming a unicorn, a billion-dollar company like Uber, is roughly 0.00006%.
Practically zero.
The author actually shares their own vulnerability here, which I deeply appreciate. They admit to trying to launch various startups since 2017. They were working alongside friends who had had access to massive safety nets and rich parents, and they assumed the whole time that they were the special exception to the rule.
Right. They thought the base rate didn't apply to them.
They believed their specific intelligence or work ethic made the base rate irrelevant. They were wrong. The base rate applies to everyone, regardless of how special your mother thinks you are.
We see this exact same cognitive trap destroying wealth and finance and investing every day, too. The source text gives another brilliant example.
Go for it.
You're looking to invest your retirement savings, and you see a mutual fund or a hedge fund manager who returned an astonishing 40% last year.
40% is huge.
Massive. Your intuition immediately says, this person is a genius. I need to put all my money with them right now before I miss out. Your brain is entirely focused on the specific data point of last year's performance. But what happens if we force ourselves to ask for the base rate?
The base rate of any actively managed fund beating the broader market average for just 3 consecutive years is incredibly low, roughly 15%.
So the statistical reality is that last year's massive 40% performance tells you almost absolutely nothing about what that manager is going to do next year. It's highly likely to just be a variant spike, not sustainable genius.
Or consider the modern phenomenon of the Twitter guru or the YouTube finance influencer.
Oh, the worst.
You see a guy online who famously predicted the exact week of the last cryptocurrency crash, or the stock market dip. People flock to him in droves, subscribing to his newsletter, thinking he has a crystal ball. But let's apply base rate thinking.
All right.
If you have 10,000 completely random people on the internet, all making completely random, wild financial predictions every single day, the base rate of probability dictates that about 100 of them are going to nail a massive prediction perfectly, just by pure, dumb statistical luck.
They aren't savants. They aren't financial wizards.
No. They are simply the mathematical survivors of a very large sample size of random guesses. But because we ignore the base rate of the 9,900 people who guessed wrong, we treat the 100 lucky guessers like prophets.
It's a profound perspective shift once you internalize it.
Mm.
So the direct actionable takeaway for the listener is this. You have to build a mental firewall against compelling narratives.
Yes.
Whenever someone pitches you a specific, dramatic success story, whether it's a revolutionary new diet, a foolproof trading strategy, or a business plan that can't fail, you must train your brain to pause and ask the boring, unsexy question.
What is the base rate?
Exactly. What is the base rate? How often does this type of endeavor actually succeed for the average person across a massive sample size? If the base rate is incredibly low, then you need to be intensely, almost aggressively skeptical of the specific story being told, no matter how charismatic the storyteller is.
The default assumption must always be that you are bound by the base rate, not that you are the magical exception to it.
Spot on.
Okay, so we've learned to calculate expected value, and we've learned to ground our expectations in the cold reality of base rates. But what happens when we screw up?
Which we will.
Inevitably. What happens when we miscalculate the EV, ignore the base rate, commit to a path, and then slowly realize that things are going terribly wrong? This brings us to our third mental model. And honestly, I think this specific cognitive bias causes more everyday human misery, anxiety, and wasted potential than almost any other flaw in our neurological wiring. We're talking about the sunk cost fallacy.
The sunk cost fallacy is the psychological trap of throwing good money, good time, or good emotional energy after bad. It is our profound inability to walk away from a losing hand simply because we've already put chips in the pot.
It's so hard to walk away.
It is. The author uses a very simple, everyday analogy to introduce this, and it perfectly encapsulates the absurdity of human behavior. Imagine you go to a local theater and you buy a movie ticket for $15.
Okay.
You sit down in the dark, the movie starts, and within 30 minutes, it is undeniably, aggressively terrible. The script is awful, the acting is painful, you are utterly miserable in your seat. The question is, do you stand up and leave the theater, or do you sit there and endure the remaining hour and a half of misery?
Now, if we look at this purely as a rational economic equation, the answer is blatantly, blindingly obvious. You stand up and leave immediately.
Right.
That $15 you spent on the ticket is a sunk cost. It is gone forever, it has vanished from your bank account, and no amount of suffering in that dark theater is going to magically convince the theater manager to come refund your money. The past is unchangeable.
So true.
The only logical, rational question a healthy brain should be asking is, how do I want to spend the next 90 minutes of my life? Am I better off sitting here watching a movie I actively hate? Or should I go home, read a book, take a walk, and actually enjoy my evening?
And yet, despite that airtight logic, almost everyone stays in the theater.
Why do we do that?
Because if you ask them why, they will all give you the exact same deeply irrational answer. Well, I can't leave. I already paid for it.
I already paid for it. That single phrase is the battle cry of the sunk cost fallacy. We feel an overwhelming, almost physical, psychological need to justify our past expenditures and decisions.
Right. To leave the theater is to admit defeat. It is to admit that our past self made a mistake when buying the ticket. So our ego demands that we endure present suffering simply to validate a past error.
Now, staying for a bad movie is relatively harmless in the grand scheme of things.
Sure.
But the author explicitly and powerfully highlights how this exact same flawed logic translates to incredibly high-stakes, life-altering scenarios where the costs are measured in years of your life.
This is where it gets heavy. Think about someone who has been working in a miserable, soul-crushing, dead-end corporate job. They know there's no upward mobility. They hate their boss. But when you ask them why they don't quit, they say,
I can't leave now. I've already invested 5 years of my life into climbing the ladder at this specific company. I'd be throwing all that time away.
Exactly. But the brutal mathematical truth is that those 5 years are a sunk cost. They are already gone. You cannot harvest them back. You cannot cash them in at the bank. The universe does not owe you a return on that time.
The universe does not care.
It doesn't. The only rational question is, what is the highest expected value use of your next 3 years? Do you want to spend the next 3 years being miserable just to honor the past 5? It's madness.
It is madness, and it absolutely dominates financial markets as well. The author points out how retail investors constantly fall into this trap.
Oh, all the time.
Let's say you bought a stock, or maybe some obscure altcoin or meme coin, and the market turns against you. The asset is now down 50% from the price you originally paid. Your rational brain should be evaluating the asset based on its current fundamentals, but your emotional brain says, I'm already down so much I can't possibly sell now and lock in the loss. I have to wait for the price to come back up to what I paid.
This is pure, unadulterated emotional thinking.
Right. The stock market is not a conscious entity. The market does not know what price you entered at. The market does not care how much money you have lost, and it certainly does not care about making you whole again.
The market only knows today's price.
So the author argues that the only rational question you should ask yourself is, if I didn't own this stock and I had this exact amount of money in pure cash sitting in my account right now, would I actively choose to buy this specific asset at today's exact price?
That's the test.
If the answer is no, then holding on to it is completely irrational. You are just paying a daily tax to your own ego.
It applies just as viciously to interpersonal relationships, which is perhaps where the sunk cost fallacy is most difficult to untangle, because human emotions are vastly more complex than stock prices.
Definitely.
People will stay in unhappy, unfulfilling, or even deeply toxic dynamics for years, and their justification is almost always anchored in the past. We've been together for 6 years, we've built a life together, can't just throw all that history away.
But again, we must be ruthless with the logic. Those 6 years have already happened. The time is spent. The emotional capital has been deployed. The only relevant question for your future well-being is whether the next 6 years with this person will bring you joy and growth.
It is incredibly difficult to detach our present emotions from our past investments, which is why the author proposes an aggressively simple, almost surgical mental hack to bypass the emotional friction.
I really love this fix because it forces clarity. The author says that whenever you are agonizing over a decision about whether to continue with a project, a job, an investment, or a relationship, you must perform a strict mental reset.
A total reset.
You have to pretend that you are starting from absolute scratch right this very second. You wake up with amnesia regarding everything you have already spent, whether that's money, time, sweat, or emotional energy. You wipe the slate clean.
You only look forward.
And you ask yourself one binary question. Knowing everything I know about this situation right now, today, would I actively choose to walk down this path from the very beginning?
If the answer is no, you have to get out. You have to cut your losses immediately. The past is not coming back to save you, regardless of how much of your future you sacrifice on its altar.
It's a harsh truth, but it is incredibly liberating once you practice it.
It really is.
Now, assuming you have mastered the art of ignoring sunk costs, and you are finally looking clearly at the present reality without the baggage of the past, you encounter the next major cognitive hurdle. The world is not static. Reality is constantly shifting, and new information is constantly arriving. How do you process that new information?
This brings us to section 4, Bayesian thinking.
And this addresses a massive fundamental flaw in human nature. Think about how most people operate in the modern world, especially regarding politics, economics, or even deeply held personal beliefs. Most people form an opinion based on some initial intuition or limited data.
Right, they lock it in.
Once they make a decision, that opinion solidifies. It becomes part of their identity. And then when new evidence comes to light that completely contradicts their belief, what do? They don't change their minds.
Never?
They simply ignore the evidence, or worse, they perform incredible mental gymnastics to discredit the source of the evidence, all to protect their original belief. They've already decided, so the case is closed.
It is the definition of dogma. Bayesian thinking, derived from Bayes' theorem in probability theory, is the exact opposite of dogma. It is the mathematically correct way to update your beliefs in the face of new, uncertain evidence.
It's how scientists think.
Exactly. It's how a rigorous scientist processes reality, as opposed to how a stubborn politician defends a talking point. It provides a framework that allows you to change your mind fluidly without wildly overreacting to every single sensational new headline, but also without being entirely closed off to the reality of shifting facts.
Now, I have to be honest, whenever I hear the phrase Bayes' theorem, my brain immediately conjures up a terrifying image of a university blackboard covered in complex Greek symbols, and my eyes just glaze over.
Well, same here.
But what the author does here is brilliant. They translate the terrifying mathematical formula into plain, intuitive English, and the conceptual machinery goes like this. Your updated belief should equal how well this new piece of evidence actually fits your existing theory.
Okay.
Multiplied by how confident you were in your theory before the evidence arrived, all divided by how common this new evidence is in the world generally, regardless of whether your theory is true or not. Okay, even in English, that is a dense mouthful. We need to walk through a highly relatable example to see how the gears of this engine actually turn.
The author provides a perfect everyday office scenario. Picture your workplace. You have a vague, nagging suspicion that one of your coworkers, let's call her Sarah, is getting ready to quit her job.
Okay, Sarah's on the way out.
Now, before you see any actual hard evidence, you have to establish a baseline guess to anchor your math. You have to consult the base rate. Most people don't abruptly quit their jobs in any given random month. So you establish a baseline probability, your prior belief of, let's say, 10%. You're 10% confident Sarah's leaving.
Okay, 10% is my starting line. I'm mildly suspicious, but mostly assuming she's staying. But then a new piece of evidence appears. You're scrolling online, and you notice that Sarah just completely overhauled and updated her entire LinkedIn profile.
Now, the dogmatic thinker might instantly panic and scream, she updated LinkedIn. She's definitely quitting. It's 100% happening.
Right.
But the Bayesian thinker steps back and evaluates this evidence mathematically.
Exactly. You run the evidence through the Bayesian framework. First, you ask the affirmative question. If Sarah's actually secretly planning to quit, what is the probability she would update her LinkedIn profile? It's highly likely. Let's assign that a 70% probability.
Makes sense.
But here is the critical second step, the counter question, which almost everyone forgets to ask. If Sarah's not planning to quit, what is the probability she would update her LinkedIn profile anyway?
Well, people spruce up their profiles randomly all the time. Maybe she went to a networking event. Maybe she was just bored on a Friday afternoon. Let's say there's a 15% chance you would do it entirely randomly while planning to stay.
Okay, so this is where the conceptual math magic happens. We don't need to get bogged down in the fractional arithmetic, but we feed these numbers into the Bayesian engine. We take the high chance to do it if quitting. We weigh it against our original 10% baseline suspicion, and then we factor in the likelihood that this is just a random innocent update.
Right.
When the gears stop turning, the formula spits out a new, mathematically updated probability of roughly 34%. Now, I want you to really look at what just happened here. You started the week with a 10% suspicion. You saw a piece of concerning evidence of the LinkedIn update. Your brain has now rationally, calmly updated your belief from 10% to 34%.
Notice the emotional regulation in that 34%. You didn't give in to panic and jump to a 90% certainty that she's leaving. That would be wildly overreacting to a single ambiguous data point.
But you also didn't stubbornly ignore the evidence and stay anchored at your original 10%?
Exactly. You absorbed the data, weighed its significance, and moved to 34%. It is the exact mathematically rational update. And the brilliance of Bayesian thinking is that the process doesn't stop. It is a continuous loop.
Right. So let's say a week later, evidence number 2 arrives. You notice Sarah starts taking hushed, private phone calls in the hallway outside the office. You don't start from scratch. You run the Bayesian update again, using your new 34% belief as the starting point.
The new prior.
Yes, the new prior. You weigh the new evidence, and the math nudges your belief up, maybe to 55%. Then, evidence number 3 drops. During a team meeting, she becomes strangely vague and non-committal about leading a long-term project scheduled for next quarter. You run the update engine again, and it nudges you to 70% certainty.
Do you see how elegant and drama-free this is? Each distinct piece of evidence nudges the probability gradually, proportionally, and rationally. There's no emotional whiplash.
No flipping out.
Right. There is no binary flipping between she is definitely staying forever and she is quitting tomorrow. It replaces emotional volatility with mathematical precision.
And what is truly fascinating is that this isn't just a theoretical mental exercise for office gossip. This is the exact underlying architecture of how real-world prediction markets operate.
Oh, absolutely. The author explicitly points to platforms like Polymarket as the ultimate manifestation of Bayesian thinking at scale.
Yeah.
If you look at the price of a contract on Polymarket, say, predicting the outcome of an election or a major geopolitical event, that price is essentially a real-time aggregated Bayesian posterior probability.
It's a living number.
It is a living number that is constantly updating as new information flows into the ecosystem.
The text note's a staggering example of this. Polymarket actually predicted the geopolitical strikes in Iran before major multi-billion-dollar news networks like CNN broke the story. How is that possible?
Because a prediction market isn't relying on one pundit's intuition.
Exactly. You have thousands of highly incentivized individual traders acting as independent Bayesian engines, feeding tiny fractional pieces of new evidence into the market simultaneously. One trader notices a subtle change in commercial flight manifests over the region, and they buy, nudging the probability up 0.5%.
Another trader analyzes a newly released commercial satellite image showing troop movements, and they nudge it another 2%.
The aggregate result of all these thousands of proportional micro-updates is a spookily accurate, incredibly fast reflection of reality.
It is the wisdom of the crowd, disciplined by math. The profound takeaway for the listener here is about intellectual humility. You must hold your opinions loosely. Do not marry your beliefs.
Treat your current worldview as merely a temporary draft, waiting to be revised. Update your beliefs constantly as new data arrives, and ensure the strength of your update is strictly proportional to the strength and rarity of the evidence.
Treat your worldview as a temporary draft. I love that.
But this brings us to a massive blind spot. If Bayesian updating is all about how we rationally process the evidence we can see, what about the evidence we cannot see? What if the data pool itself is corrupted?
This leads us directly into Section 5, survivorship bias.
If you want to understand why so many people feel inadequate or why so many people take ruinous financial risks, you have to understand this bias.
The core concept here is that we wildly, almost comically overestimate the probability of success in life because the modern world only ever shows us the numerators, the triumphant winners, the survivors, the viral hits, and it actively, systematically hides the denominators, the massive silent graveyard of failed attempts.
The graveyard of invisible losers. It is a pervasive illusion that skews our entire perception of risk and reward. The author provides some phenomenal cultural examples that perfectly illustrate how this trap works. Let's deconstruct the mythology of the billionaire college dropout.
Oh, that's a classic one.
We all know the famous names in Silicon Valley. They get the cover of Forbes magazine. They get the glowing 3-hour podcast interviews where they wax poetic about how dropping out of Harvard or Stanford to build their vision in a garage was the boldest, best decision they ever made.
The media narrative makes it look like dropping out is a viable, perhaps even superior, shortcut to extreme wealth and innovation.
But what is entirely missing from that compelling narrative? The denominator.
The denominator.
The 10,000 other kids who also dropped out of college that exact same year, tried to build a company in their garage, failed miserably, and are now completely broke and struggling to pay off their student loans without a degree.
Those 10,000 invisible failures do not get magazine covers. They don't have high-priced PR teams booking them on podcasts. They just quietly struggle in obscurity. But because the one lone survivor gets 100% of our media attention, our brains subconsciously calculate the odds of success as incredibly high. We assume the numerator is the entire story.
We see this exact same toxic dynamic amplified 1,000-fold by social media algorithms, particularly in spaces like crypto Twitter or day trading communities. Your timeline is an endless, curated parade of people posting screenshots of their massive financial gains.
The guy who YOLO gambled $500 on a random meme coin and turned it into $50,000 gets 200,000 likes. The algorithm boosts him to the top of your feed. He looks like a genius.
But what about the 500 other guys who also gambled $500 on similar coins and watched their accounts go to absolute zero?
They feel deep shame. They quietly delete their accounts. They disappear entirely from the dataset you are consuming.
So when you scroll through your phone on your lunch break, your brain perceives a distorted reality where everyone around you is winning effortlessly and getting rich quick. It makes you feel like you are missing out, which drives you to make terrible, high-risk EV decisions just to catch up.
But the source text drops a sobering empirical statistic to shatter this illusion. Data shows that roughly 87% of wallets on the highly efficient prediction market, Poly market, actually lose money over time.
87%.
The vast majority are bleeding cash. You just never see them post their losses on Twitter.
It totally skews our baseline perception of reality. The author also touches on the pervasive, romanticized advice to follow your passion, specifically looking at the brutal realities of the restaurant industry.
It is a beautiful dream to open your own cozy cafe or neighborhood bistro. But the brutal base rate, the denominator, is that roughly 60% of independent restaurants fail and close their doors within their very first year.
60% in year one.
80% go bankrupt within 5 years. But here is the trick of survivorship bias. We only ever eat at the restaurants that survived.
Right. The dead restaurants don't have glowing neon signs. They don't have lines out the door. They are boarded up and invisible.
So we look around our vibrant downtown and assume running a successful restaurant is a common, achievable feat, completely ignoring the invisible carnage of the 80% who lost their life savings trying to do the exact same thing.
The author also mentions the modern music industry, which is the ultimate example of the numerator versus denominator problem. The cultural narrative is just record your song in your bedroom, upload your track to Spotify, and the algorithm will make you go viral.
Do you know what the actual denominator is? Do you know how many individual tracks are uploaded to Spotify every single day?
Over 90,000. 90,000 songs a day. And the median number of plays a track gets is roughly 30.
30 plays.
But we only ever hear the top 10 viral hits on the radio or on TikTok playlists. The other 89,990 tracks uploaded that specific day are met with pure, absolute, soul-crushing silence.
So how do we combat this pervasive illusion? How do we stop being fooled by the survivors? The fix requires rigorous, active, critical thinking. Whenever someone presents you with a shiny success story as proof that a certain risky path works, whether it's a day trading strategy, a bold career move, or a lifestyle choice, you must actively pause and search for the denominator.
Ask yourself, how many people actually attempted this exact same thing in total? What is the true percentage of people who succeeded versus those who failed?
If you cannot find that denominator, if the data on the failures is hidden, obscured, or simply unavailable, you must default to assuming that the success rate is incredibly low. You have to constantly remind yourself that the world is a heavily curated museum that only displays the numerators.
Okay, let's take a breath and synthesize where we are, because this is a heavy toolkit.
It is a lot.
Let's say you, the listener, have truly absorbed all of this. You've looked at an opportunity, you've run the expected value calculation, and it's positive. You've checked the base rates, and they're realistic. You've ruthlessly ignored your sunk costs, you've updated your beliefs using Bayes' theorem, and you've aggressively factored in survivorship bias to make sure you aren't being fooled by invisible losers.
You've done the work.
You have done all the grueling mathematical and psychological work, and you have finally genuinely found a rare opportunity where you actually have a legitimate statistical edge. Now comes the final practical hurdle. How do you act on it?
Right. How much do you actually commit?
How much time, how much money, or how much effort do you actually commit to this edge? This brings us to Section 6, the Kelly criterion.
And this is where most smart people stumble at the finish line. Because when people finally do the work and find a real edge, they usually make one of two massive terminal mistakes regarding position sizing. They either bet way too much in a YOLO frenzy of overconfidence and get wiped out by variance, or they bet way too little because they are paralyzed by fear and they fail to capitalize on their hard work.
The Kelly criterion is a mathematical formula designed to solve exactly this problem. It calculates the exact mathematically optimal size of a bet or a series of bets to maximize your long-term compound growth rate while strictly avoiding total ruin.
Now, I promised we wouldn't just read dry algebra, but let's outline the mechanism of the formula so people understand what it's weighing. The math basically takes P, which is your honest, rigorously calculated probability of winning. It subtracts Q, which is your probability of losing. And it divides that by B, which is your payoff ratio, how much you stand to win for every dollar you risk.
It essentially weighs your specific confidence against your specific potential reward.
Exactly. It scales your aggression based on the quality of your edge. Let's use the source's simple example to ground this. Imagine you find a highly favorable scenario where you calculate you have a solid 60% chance of winning a bet. And if you win, you double your money. So the payoff ratio is 1-to-1.
Okay.
If we plug those numbers into the Kelly formula machinery, the result it spits out is 0.20. The pure mathematics of the Kelly criterion is dictating that the absolute optimal amount to commit to this specific opportunity is exactly 20% of your total available bankroll.
Okay, let's pause right there. As a skeptical listener, I hear that and my stomach drops. 20%. If I have $100,000 in life savings and I find a solid investment where I have a 60% edge, the math is telling me to drop $20,000 on a single bet.
It feels completely insane.
Even with a 60% edge, there is a massive 40% chance I lose 20 grand in an afternoon. That feels like a recipe for a heart attack.
And your intuition there is actually entirely correct. Here is where the pristine theory of mathematics violently crashes into the messy reality of human psychology. The author provides a massive, vital reality check regarding this formula. Over the last 50 years of real-world application in the high-stakes arenas of quantitative finance, hedge funds, and professional gambling, we have learned one undeniable lesson. Betting the full Kelly percentage is emotionally destructive for human beings.
Because of the variance, right.
Exactly. While full Kelly is mathematically proven to be the absolute optimal strategy for maximizing growth over an infinite timeline, human beings do not live on an infinite timeline. We live in the short term. And in the short term, the variance, the wild, violent swings up and down in your total net worth will destroy you psychologically long before the math finally pays off in your favor.
You'll just panic and sell at the bottom.
You will endure drawdowns that are so sickening. You will capitulate and abandon the strategy at the exact wrong moment. You simply won't be able to stomach the ride. That is why almost every single successful professional gambler and quantitative trader uses a modified strategy called fractional Kelly, specifically quarter Kelly or half Kelly.
So instead of betting that full, terrifying 20% the formula suggests, they deliberately, consciously underbet their edge, committing only 5% to maybe 10% of their bankroll.
Yes, it is a necessary compromise between mathematical optimization and human emotional endurance. The author notes that by betting quarter Kelly, you ensure that your growth curve is smoother. You aren't going to get fabulously rich by tomorrow afternoon, but you absolutely guarantee that you will survive the variance.
You ensure that a string of bad luck won't blow up your entire account and ruin you next week.
You stay in the game long enough for your edge to compound.
And what I find so incredibly compelling about this piece is how the author takes this very dry, strictly financial portfolio management concept and applies it broadly to life decisions. How do we apply the Kelly criterion to our daily lives?
It serves as a profound analogy for resource allocation in general. Take your career, for example. Let's say you have a side project or a startup idea that you have rigorously evaluated, and you believe it has a highly positive expected value. The full Kelly reckless YOLO move would be to march into your boss's office, quit your stable job, burn your bridges, and go all in on the startup tomorrow morning.
Which exposes you to massive, ruinous variance. If the startup fails quickly, you have zero income and you're broke.
The quarter Kelly approach is vastly more sustainable and intelligent. You negotiate with your current employer to reduce your hours to 4 days a week, and you dedicate that one newly freed day entirely to building your side project.
That is brilliant. You are deliberately committing resources to the area where you have a mathematical edge, but you are mitigating the ruinous downside risk to your livelihood.
It applies perfectly to learning and self-improvement, too. If you decide you want to upskill to get a promotion, the anti-Kelly move is to buy 5 different complex textbooks and try to learn coding, Spanish, public speaking, and accounting all at the exact same time.
You spread your limited cognitive bandwidth way too thin, you master absolutely none of them, and your EV drops to 0.
The Kelly approach dictates that you identify the single specific skill that has the absolute highest expected value for your specific career trajectory, and you concentrate your focus deeply on mastering just that one thing.
It even applies to human relationships. The author argues that you shouldn't spread your limited social and emotional energy dangerously thin across 20 or 30 shallow, surface-level acquaintances where you barely know their last names.
That is a terrible allocation of resources.
Instead, apply the Kelly criterion. Identify the 4 or 5 people in your life who genuinely matter, who share your values, and who provide a high expected value of mutual support, growth, and happiness. Invest your time and emotional depth heavily into them.
The overarching universal principle of the Kelly criterion is clear. When you have done the work and found an edge, you must concentrate your resources to take advantage of it. But you must never concentrate them so heavily that a stroke of bad luck wipes you out entirely. Always leave room to be wrong.
Always leave room to be wrong. Which brings us perfectly to our synthesis section 7, where we tie all these disparate, fascinating threads together.
Right.
These 6 concepts, expected value, base rate neglect, sunk cost fallacy, Bayesian thinking, survivorship bias, and the Kelly criterion, are not just a collection of random, quirky math tricks to pull out to sound smart dinner parties. As the author forcefully argues, when you combine them, they form a complete, robust, defensive operating system for navigating reality.
Let's quickly trace how the system flows in sequence. Expected value is your ignition. It tells you whether a specific action or risk is mathematically worth taking in the first place. Base rates provide the vital, sobering reality check, ensuring your EV estimates aren't based on delusional fantasy.
The sunk cost rule serves as your emergency brake, reminding you to brutally ignore the unchangeable past when things go wrong. Bayes' theorem provides your navigation system, giving you the protocol for how to rationally course-correct and update your views when new information arrives.
Survivorship bias acts as your radar. constantly sweeping the horizon and asking what hidden data you aren't seeing. And finally, the Kelly criterion is your throttle. It tells you exactly how much fuel to inject into the engine once the rest of the system flashes green.
It really is a comprehensive mental firewall against human stupidity. And what's fascinating is where the author suggests you can observe this entire operating system functioning in its purest, most ruthless form. They highlight prediction markets, like Polymarket, as the ultimate training ground. It is a literal gymnasium for decision making.
The gym analogy is perfect. Because in these markets, you cannot hide behind vague opinions or rhetoric. Every single contract forces you to assign a concrete, numerical probability to an event. If you think the aggregated crowd is wrong about the likelihood of an outcome and you believe you have a logical edge, you place a trade.
And here is the brutal beauty of the prediction market, Jim. Your profit and loss statement provides instant, undeniable, mathematically precise feedback on whether your thinking was structurally sound or fatally flawed. There is absolutely no room for ego, no room for spin, and no room for excuses.
The market doesn't care about your feelings. It only cares about your accuracy. The author notes that if you analyze the top 1.2% of traders on these platforms, the elite few who consistently pull money out of the market over the long term, you will find that they all strictly utilize this exact six-model operating system.
And what's wild is they probably didn't sit down and read dense academic textbooks about behavioral economics. They use these models because the brutal, uncompromising efficiency of the market physically beat it into them.
Make a bad baseline estimate, lose real money, feel the pain, learn the lesson, refuse to update your Bayesian priors, lose more money, learn the lesson, repeat that painful cycle 500 times, and that operating system becomes your permanent, hardwired curriculum.
It is a harsh teacher, but undeniably effective. And speaking of harsh lessons, I think the most resonant, powerful part of this entire deep dive is the author's own vulnerability at the end of the piece. They share this incredibly uncomfortable epiphany where they looked back over their own history and realized they had been making fundamentally flawed decisions on basically everything important in their life.
Yeah, that level of self-reflection is rare. They realized they had stayed in miserable, dead-end jobs way too long because the sunk cost fallacy held them hostage. They realized they had never aggressively negotiated their salary because loss aversion made them fear the awkwardness of a no more than they valued the massive expected value of securing a higher baseline pay for the rest of their career.
They admitted to blindly following crypto influencers who just happened to be the lucky, statistically insignificant survivors of survivorship bias. They flip-flopped wildly on some beliefs and stubbornly clung to others because they had no concept of Bayesian updating. And they constantly spread their focus too thin across dozens of failing side projects, completely violating the Kelly criterion.
It takes immense intellectual honesty to publicly admit that your entire past framework was broken. And in doing so, the author zeroes in on what I believe is the single most profound insight in the entire text. They write, "You don't feel irrational when you're being irrational. You feel certain. The certainty is the bug."
I want everyone listening to really stop and absorb the weight of that statement. The certainty is the bug. When you are in the middle of making a terrible, emotionally driven, mathematically disastrous decision, your brain does not wave a helpful red flag and say, hey, you are being irrational right now.
Instead, it does the exact opposite. It floods your nervous system with a deeply comforting feeling of absolute conviction. Your subconscious ancient gut makes the decision instantly based on fear, loss aversion, or vibes, and then your highly evolved conscious brain works overtime to invent incredibly logical-sounding, articulate reasons to justify the choice you already made.
That is terrifying. The feeling of absolute certainty, especially when it lacks mathematical backing, isn't a sign that you are right. It is the ultimate trap. It's the symptom of the cognitive disease. Now, for the listener who is as fascinated by this rabbit hole as we are and who wants to start dismantling their own false certainties, the author generously provides an incredible reading list to go even deeper into this operating system.
It's an essential syllabus. They highly recommend Daniel Kahneman's legendary book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which is essentially the foundational Bible for understanding all these cognitive biases and how our two systems of thinking interact. They also suggest Philip Tetlock's Super Forecasting if you want to understand exactly how the world's most elite predictors process information.
Nate Silver's The Signal and the Noise is brilliant for learning how to separate real, actionable data from distracting noise. Nassim Taleb's Fooled by Randomness is a masterclass in humbling your ego regarding the massive role of luck and variance in success.
William Poundstone's Fortunes Formula provides a fascinating, almost thriller-like history of the Kelly criterion. And finally, Annie Duke's Thinking in Bets, which beautifully translates professional poker strategy into everyday life decisions.
That is a phenomenal lineup of books. But as the author points out, and as we need to emphasize as we wrap up, simply reading the books is only half the battle. Reading about the gym doesn't build muscle. The author emphasizes that these 6 models will not magically make you perfect. Nothing will. The world is too complex, and variance is too chaotic.
But what these models do provide is a structured, rigorous pre-flight checklist for your brain. Think about it. A master pilot with 10,000 hours of flight time still uses a basic checklist before every single takeoff. Not because they forgot how to fly the plane, but because they know that human experts, when relying purely on memory and instinct, will inevitably, tragically miss critical details.
Exactly. The checklist saves lives. So here is your immediate, practical call to action straight from the source material. The very next time you face a major decision in your life, whether it's debating a career pivot, contemplating a large financial commitment, or evaluating a major step in a relationship, do not just go with your gut. Do not rely on the vibes.
Force yourself to pause for just 5 minutes. Sit down with a physical piece of paper and run through the checklist. Do a rough expected value calculation. Try to identify the true base rate of success. Search ruthlessly for your hidden sunk costs. I guarantee you, if you do this honestly, you will be shocked at how wildly the cold mathematical reality differs from your initial emotional instinct.
And I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought that builds directly on the author's closing remarks. The author notes that simply reading to the end of an article on math formulas or listening to a deep dive about them already puts you in a tiny elite minority of the population. Most people actively run away from this kind of rigorous, uncomfortable thinking.
But having the information in your head is not your edge. All of these formulas, Bayes, Kelly, EV, have been publicly available in library books for decades. The author says your true edge is caring enough to actually apply it in the moment.
Let's extrapolate that one step further. If these mathematical truths are universally available, yet our human psychology is fundamentally biologically wired to rebel against them, if our brains are literally chemically addicted to loss aversion, sunk cost justification, and the warm illusion of false certainty, then is the ultimate skill of the future really just intellectual intelligence?
Or is the true dividing line between those who succeed and those who stagnate going to be profound emotional regulation? Can you train yourself to be so emotionally disciplined that you can watch your deepest, most ingrained evolutionary survival instincts scream at you to take the safe path, and yet consciously, calmly choose to let the cold, hard math override them? That is the ultimate challenge.
Wow. That is the million-dollar question to chew on as you go about your week. Can you let the math override your instincts when your gut is screaming at you? We hope this deep dive has given you the foundational tools to start trying. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration. Now, your mission is clear. Take these models, embrace the discomfort of analyzing your own biases, ignore your sunk costs, and go out and make a vastly better decision today than you would have an hour ago. We'll catch you next time.